Hey there, today we're going to be taking a look at the Beelink SER5 Pro versus the Beelink SER5 Max. These two mini PCs are actually made by the same company and really released around the same time and sold on the market at the exact same time, but they are pretty drastically different. Main difference being that the SER5 Pro comes with the Ryzen 7 5700U and the SER5 Max comes with the Ryzen 7 5800H. This effectively means that the SER5 Max actually has the most recent chip, and it is a chip of a different tier. So we're talking about a U series APU versus an H series. H series APUs are designed to go onto systems with higher base TDPs, and because of that, the chips are designed to just run hotter. Now, the default maximum TDP of the 5800H is 45 watts, but Beelink has configured it themselves to 54 watts. This is a little excessive, and in most cases, you will not even get close to utilizing the full 54 watts of power, just due to the fact that you'd have to max out the CPUs to even start to get close to that level of usage. No amount of real world gaming or rendering or anything like that is actually going to max out your CPU like that. So I've pretty much never run into any games that actually utilize 54 watts of power. Now, the 5700U is designed for systems that have a TDP of around 15 watts with a maximum of 25 watts, at least by the official spec from AMD. But Beelink also did go as far as to raise the TDP of this chip to 35 watts. So it actually is running outside of its official spec the same way the 5800H is doing. So let's actually see what this does for the performance of these two chips, because outside of that, everything else should in theory be the same. They're both 8 cores, they're both 16 threads, they're both using Vega based Radeon 8 GPUs, though one of them goes up to 2000 megahertz while the other one goes up to 1900. So let's see if being based off of Zen 2 and having a slightly lower clock speed is going to make that big of a difference, especially at a lower TDP. So the first game we're going to be taking a look at side by side is Tiny Tina's Wonderland, here running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the quality preset. And like this, both systems are actually able to give us a decent playing experience, but the 5800H in the SER5 Max is taking a lead here. It is getting very close to a 50 FPS average, but still not quite there. Still, it is a 15% increase over the results that we were getting on the SER5 Pro. That being said, it's not exactly a 15% price difference between the two systems, and the 5800H is making noticeably more noise, even though the temperature difference between the two systems is actually pretty different. While the 5800H is running cooler, it's definitely using more power, so it is making just noticeably more noise. So that may be a problem for you, and that 15% performance uplift might be nice, but not as nice if the system is just being so loud that you personally can't really enjoy gaming like this. The next game we're taking a look at is Red Dead Redemption 2, here running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we're using FSR, but this time at the performance preset. And we are seeing a difference between the two systems here, where there is a increase in the FPS average and the 1% lows, but it's not exactly incredible. Still, it does push Red Dead Redemption on these systems enough that at least on the SER5 Max, we're actually able to get a above 30 FPS average. Those 1% lows are just 1 FPS below the 30 mark. That is are pretty much bare minimum, and in general it is going to be a more playable experience than if we were trying to play this on the SER5 Pro. Still, you need to temper your expectations due to the fact that we are using FSR at the performance preset here, though visually it is very aggressive and you can see the shimmering in any kind of movement. But if your goal was to make this game playable, well, the SER5 Max is what you're going to need. Now, another title that we see pretty frequently on this channel due to just how heavy it is, especially for its age, is Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and here running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, both systems are really struggling with this title. Due to the lack of FSR in this title, even though it is almost 10 years old, it still does a lot of damage to these little mini PCs in terms of just their performance. And well, here it's really no exception. While there is an increase in the FPS average and the 1% lows, neither one is going to be a playable enough experience. You really have to start dropping the resolution of this game. So So at 1080p, both of these are just really falling apart, and it does show that FSR is doing a lot of heavy lifting to make these chips functional with modern games. And well, the next game is actually one of those that I was talking about. Here you can see Helldivers 2 running on both systems with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are also using FSR at the performance preset. So extremely aggressive settings all around. But really, this was one of the best showings for the 5800H in the SER5 Max, because we see a pretty substantial uplift in both our 1% lows and our FPS average. Now, I was able to actually play through the entirety of the mission on both systems, and I did actually end up doing 3 missions on each one. Trust me, on the SER5 Pro, that was significantly worse. It was definitely playable on both systems, but it just felt noticeably better to play it on the SER5 Max. On the SER5 Max, after playing a few matches, I really just didn't care too much about the performance. It was at least playable. While on the SER5 Pro, I was really noticing the performance throughout a lot of it, and I really just wish I could get that extra little bump to push it at least above 30 FPS consistently, but that just was not the case. So after playing these two, I could pretty much say that there is a pretty substantial difference, and the SER5 Max is just the way to go if you really want to be able to do gaming on a mini PC within this price range, but it's not exactly amazing either. Still, at these price points, it is kind of hard to find a mini PC that is competent at gaming, especially one that actually does maintain decent levels of CPU performance. But another AAA title that we took a look at is Guardians of the Galaxy, here running with the lowest in-game settings, and again using FSR at the performance preset, and FSR is of course doing a lot of heavy lifting here, where both systems are actually able to give us decent enough 1% lows, though the SER5 Pro does technically fall 1 FPS below our bare minimum of 30 that we try to aim for. And there is a uplift in the FPS average going with the SER5 Max instead of the Pro, but it's really not going to make a night and day difference in the gaming experience in this title in comparison to what we saw with Helldivers 2. And of course, the disappointment continues with Returnal here, again also running at the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the performance preset. That's pretty much going to be the settings that we use in the vast majority of titles if FSR is present, because FSR is really doing a lot to make these games at least somewhat playable. Though in this case, that really wasn't what happened. Both the systems give a very embarrassing display in this title, though this title really does destroy a lot of these mini PCs. It wasn't until RDNA 3 that I actually started to see some results out of this game that weren't completely disappointing to see. And even then, we're still just stuck using FSR at the performance preset, and visually speaking, especially in a title like this with a lot of particles and just a lot of small things just flying around on the screen, the ghosting from FSR looks noticeably bad. Of course, the trend does continue where we see older titles like Killing Floor 2 here running with the lowest in-game graphics settings actually give us some fantastic results in both systems, though there is a noticeable improvement with the SER5 Max, where we see a decent uplift in both the FPS average and the 1% lows. Of course, the uplift in the average is noticeably higher. Still, the improvement in the 1% lows is nice to see, especially because it is getting us closer to that 60 FPS that we want to see to really be having a fantastic gaming experience. All in all, it's still a very nice improvement, and it makes the gaming experience just that much nicer, especially if you have a high refresh rate display. But really, it's these types of titles that I recommend playing on these types of systems. These older titles that kind of just are designed to run on significantly weaker hardware than what's around today. Unfortunately, these Vega APUs are kind of just showing their age, and a lot of modern games really bring them to their knees. And you really start to see the thrashing that Vega takes when you look at some of these modern AAA titles here. Of course, taking a look at Assassin's Creed Mirage running with the lowest in-game graphics settings and using FSR at the performance preset, both are giving pretty abysmal results that are not that far off from each other, almost identical 1% lows, and the FPS average is pretty much within margin of error. If I put this in front of pretty much anyone side by side without any kind of FPS counter, no one would be able to tell the difference between the two. It would pretty much be a 50-50 guess on what the result would end up being here. And of course, to close out this comparison, we're taking a look at one of the worst performing games on both of these systems, that being of course Avatar: The Frontiers of Pandora, where both systems were giving us some pretty abysmal FPS averages, though we do see some massive gains in those 1% lows going from 0 all the way to 5. A pretty significant uplift that is going to result in pretty much no difference between the two. The game is just extremely demanding, and this demonstrates to you that Vega is just really showing its age in 2024, which, to be fair, at no point in the existence of APUs have they really been that great at playing modern AAA titles, but they've always been very good at playing older ones on a system that doesn't really use that much power. And even the SER5 Max, with its higher TDP of 54 watts, is still noticeably less power than most computer systems out there. I mean, I measured my main desktop with an i9-12900K, which is running without multi-core enhancement, so it's just running at the Intel recommended spec. Compared that with a 6700 from AMD, while gaming I'm actually using around 300 watts. So then what is the conclusion between these two systems? Well, when it comes to gaming, as has become very apparent, the difference between the two is really not going to be that drastic. A lot of the times it's just going to give you a small little bump that might push you to the point where you could actually get to a playable level on certain games, but in the vast majority the performance difference isn't really going to be all that worth it. It's still going to fall behind. Vega is still outdated, and it is still not really being optimized for on the AMD drivers. Still, if you're looking at playing the large library of older titles out there that could pretty much run really well on these systems, well, the performance uplift of the 5800H might just be worth it for you, but honestly, the system just makes so much noise that I don't know if the vast majority of people are really going to be happy with it. If you're putting it away, it's not going to be on your desk, it's going to be behind your display, or just somewhere where you're not really going to see it, then the sound is really not going to be an issue at all. And the performance uplift is really nice, especially on the CPU side. You're really paying for the CPU here, and you should know whether or not your workload requires more CPU or not. Because single core performance, while the uplift is there, it's not enough to really justify the price difference between the two a lot of the time. Although lately, depending on the sales, I've actually been seeing the SER5 Max selling for only $20 more than the SER5 Pro. And at that point, it really comes down to whether you value a quiet system over the maximum performance system. Because at least with the SER5 Max, you're not going to find a better CPU performing system until you go higher up in price, to the point where you're looking at around 13 and even some 12th gen mini PCs, or you get to the Zen 4 based APUs. But of course, when you're shopping with Intel, you really have to pay attention to just how much TDP we're talking here, because a lot of those systems are actually so TDP starved that even 10 core CPUs or 12 core CPUs are falling behind in terms of multi-core performance with these 8 cores. And it doesn't help that a lot of those Intel cores are E cores, so on a per core basis, they're going to end up performing worse. So I think both of these systems definitely have their place on the market, but it really just depends on what exactly you want out of your system, because they're close enough in terms of performance, at least on the GPU side, that it really matters whether or not you care about squeezing out that extra little bit of performance for not a lot of money a lot of the time. But the noise factor is really one of those things where it comes down to whether that is important to you or not.